It'll take years to do. It'll take some great negotiation to do. It'll probably take calls to our U.S. senators and Congress representatives to make it happen, but it's still available to do. And as we move forward, every meeting that I've had to discuss this area is brought up again, and no one's shaking their head. Everyone's still nodding their head. So I can't tell you it's absolutely going to happen, but I can tell you it's positive enough that we're continuing on with the idea. Worst case scenario, if we move here, then you have a tidelands lease, which is different than the uplands lease. We have both right now, tidelands and uplands lease. So that still may be an alternative. But it's different than the lease we have right now, or the lease we would have for loaning property here. So I understand your concern, and you're absolutely correct to be questioning whether or not it will actually happen. All I can tell you is that's our goal, that's our intent.
My really concern about that is because the cost of that lease comes out of our fares, is my understanding. And so I think that we as islanders, I don't know, I'm speaking for myself, but I think we have a pretty strong interest that does become federal right of way. And it would be great for us as islanders, when we need our support, to ask us to write our congressional and our senatorial and get as many people involved in the process as possible. But even to me, a tidelands lease is abhorrent because it's going to impact my fares, and we have no idea. Like, you know, we had low costs, and then the current lease went into effect, and our fares have really gone sky high. And I think a lot of this is paying for that lease, and that's something I think that we all need to remember. And I don't know how many people in this room feel like I do about this. Okay, I maybe just in the minority then.
No.
Okay, that's it.
I need to know about having the diversity on this island. What will happen to this island? If you move to an island, you know there will be inconvenience on the island. And we have a beautiful place right now. Is it only growth that we want, or do we want to keep the character of this island, this beautiful island? And my fear is that nobody is going to be able to pay what they need of the people that we hope to keep on this island, or the school that we hope to keep on this island. Nobody who is low income or middle income, we will have a gated community. And most of us didn't move for a gated community. We moved for this beautiful island.
I was wondering if you go with the third alternative where you acquire those simple properties, two-part question. One, would you use eminent domain to do that? And the second question, would that be, would the cost of that acquisition be factored into ultimately the fairness?
I'll answer the second question first, and that's no. It's a capital cost, it's not an operational cost. At least that's as the ordinance sits now. So as it sits now, no, that it won't. And eminent domain, this does meet the criteria for eminent domain. And that's a council decision. But our hope, and Washington County Public Works and the county executive, we negotiate in good faith. That's why we sent out offer letters essentially with, here's a few $1,000s just to answer our letter. just to say, yes, I will entertain an option from you first. So it's essentially your first right of refusal option. And paying for that, so we're not even just asking them to volunteer that. The next step would be then to look at purchasing the property, but allowing them to rent it back for a very nominal cost until we actually start the construction. There are many things that we can do to make this as advantageous for them. It's private property, don't get me wrong. I'm an avid private property person. Just walk through my backyard sometime and think you're gonna make it to the second fence and you'll know how much of a private property I have. So I understand this, and we're not taking this lightly. This is people's homes. Now, of the 8, I've been told there's only one person that actually lives there year round. The rest are vacation. But they still fought hard to get it. They saved money to buy that. It's their property. And as far as the costs go, if we moved here, purchased all the land at approximate appraised value, and doubled that, for what you're paying for lease right now, and the extra $2 million every 5 years that comes out of it, you could buy the property in 4 years. There you go. That's how the math works.
A question about dry dock. It occurs to me that in the past there's been talk of the chief being a second boat that could be somehow available to take over when the new boat has to go into maintenance. The boats that are being talked about here seem like they're getting to be near the size of some of the smaller Washington State boats. I'm wondering if there's any consideration for making them compatible with smaller boats of this size in Washington State, and being able to, the Washington State Bird system, and being able to somehow be able to borrow one of their spare boats for dry dock. I haven't really thought this through.
Well, Mike's clearly the expert on that part, but I did want to say, understand that dry dock is not just about the chief getting new bottom pay and whatever repairs, okay? Our engineers sit around chomping on their slide rules, waiting for dry dock for the boat to get out of the way so they can jump on the landings and do all the work that has to be done there. So even if we had 16 boats, you'd still just be milling around out in a circle, because we got a whole bunch of mechanics and welders and everything else working on the landings, so there's no place to land a second vessel during much of that time anyways. So that would be something we would have to try to work out too, and I'm not exactly sure how that would be worked out. But as far as the other,
No, so Roland's point is very good. I mean, obviously, you need to do terminal work also at the same time. But as far as the boat goes, first I'm correcting the record. The smallest Washington State ferry boat currently is a 54-car vessel, so much larger than that. Now, back in my era, there was a smaller boat. It was called the Haiyu. Some of you are familiar with it. It's currently a 34-car vessel. It was 40 when it was built. Did the Haiyu fit in the very same slips that the Jumbo Mark IIs that carry 206 cars do? Yes, it did. So there are ways to configure the bow to make that work. Could you do that with a vessel like this? Yes. In fact, I'm currently in the design process with a passenger-only boat that carries 250 passengers that loads off the bow and fits into a Washington State Ferries vehicle slip. So, can it be done? Yes, it can be. A few things to take into consideration, though, is that it's all, again, a timing issue. When you build a brand new terminal at Gooseberry Point, could you make that facility work to fit that new design? Absolutely. But you've also, if you get the boat first, then you've got to probably modify both docks currently, both at Gooseberry and here at Lummi, to make that work, and you'll certainly have to modify Lummi. So there's the expense of doing that if you go down that pathway. And as Roland just said, it doesn't really circumvent your dry dock issue that you were talking about. because you still need to do work on the terminal. Whether or not the length of work on the terminal is exactly the same as the length of the work in the shipyard, I don't know that, and you know, maybe it could save you a little bit here and there, but it doesn't solve all the problems, so you have to figure out if it's worth it or not, so. And then you always have to, depending on the design of the vessel, you have to worry about the draft too, so. But can all those be solved? Yeah, naval architects are great at that, they love to do those things.
A number of years ago, the county raised the rates and saw that the ridership dropped. And so they had to collect the fares that they needed. They raised the rates again and the ridership dropped. And so Bud Jewell called us a despot spiral. And I wonder how you have figured in the cost to determine what the ridership is going to be.
So part of the ridership forecast did take into account fare changes in the last 10 years. So we did take data from 2004 forward, and so there were some fare changes in that time frame, and fare elasticities were developed in that time frame. So we do have fare elasticities. Now, that could be part of the future work. We're not quite there yet to determine how much that really impacts, but fare elasticities were developed in part of the ridership work.
So I guess I'll ask the question differently at that spot. So the forecasts that are there for 2040 and 2060, do they account for any fare increases between now and then?
No. So that is, good point, Mike. No fare changes were incorporated into this ridership forecast. If they were, those fare elasticities could be applied to the fare changes, and we could see what would happen with ridership by using those numbers. Good point.
I'll say one other thing too. Clearly with the fare levels, you can manage demand. If you want less cars, raise the prices. You know that already. If you want more passengers, lower those prices. So if you really want to move people from cars to passengers, raise the price of cars and lower passengers, and you got more people walking on. All sounds good, and it's good, but remember, what you're really interested in, what's the total revenue you bring in? Because if you lower the car prices too much and more walk-ons come in who are cheaper than cars, you might actually end up with total less revenue. And then you've got yourself in a problem, because how do you make up that difference? And typically, if you've already exhausted your revenue formula to do that, then you got to cut service. You got to cut your expenses. So it's all sort of a delicate balance of equation that takes place to figure out what's, again, the sweet spot for where your fares should land. All right. Because Anna reminded me of something else.
I don't know if we want to.
Well, you know, I mean, it's all things for you guys to ponder and think about, because you guys all have influence related to what your fares will be. I'm not saying you get to set them, but you have influence. And that is, you know, a lot of other ferry systems do things like a summer surcharge. They take a peak season, whether it's 3 months long, 5 months long, 6 months long, and they charge more for the individual sailing rides, the people who buy a single ticket. They typically don't increase or increase marginally your punch card type ticket. So that way, the residents could keep the same base fare year round, but those tourists who come in the summertime, those visitors, they're actually going to pay a price above what they would pay today. And so that's going to help your revenue stream and, you know, help keep your prices, or help keep your fares at a lower level. Just something to think about.
Can anybody not hear me here?
I can't hear you.
Who is it? Oh, you didn't want to hear me. I don't want that machine. I'm fine by myself here, okay? This is not really a question, but I have to make it into a question so that I am able to speak. So, let's ask ourselves a question. How much are all these studies costing us and upping our fares? Because these studies are all based on growth. And so,
These studies are to help us understand how many hours we will be sitting in the ferry line in the summer when it's nice outside and there's beautiful clouds and sunsets, and all our neighbors are there waiting, and they're talking to us, and they're playing music, and we're having a great time, but we don't want to be out there that long. No, 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 it's horrible. And so these studies are to study those kinds of things, our inconveniences, and we are studying whether we want to modify our schedules or not in order to live here. So my question is, how much is all this costing us? Excuse me. And then, are there any kind of studies that figure how much revenue the county will lose if we have very little growth here? Is there a study about that? Because I don't think that's in the interest of the county to study. I think everything here is focused towards growth. I was raised in Los Angeles, and I left when I was one day after 18. And I moved to Vashon Island, and I lived there for 30 years. You know what it's like there now. I know the highway, that little thing. We used to dance going across on the ferry. It was fun because we all knew each other. This is all projected growth. When there's more people, you don't know each other, so you don't dance on the ferry. So I like to study in the opposite direction. Are there any studies about less growth or just keeping it, maybe keeping it to 1,200 people, maybe 15 by 26? Because if we get higher than that, we're going to need a whole lot more than 100 ferries. We're going to need a whole bunch more houses here. And then my friend, Susan Peterson, wrote in, oh, there's going to be a lot more people driving around on our skinny little roads that we're all supposed to be going 25 miles an hour on, and a lot of we don't. So those are things to think about, because if you build it, they will come. And we're going to know them, and we're going to have to relate to those people. We're going to have relationships with those people, as well as the people on the reservation. Now, I think those houses that they're going to buy from those 8 people there that don't live there all the time, I hope that I will be happy that those people are not there so much. Yet it is eminent domain. So think if that was you. What if they decide, oh, it's a good idea to build something good for your house, for your house and all your neighbors. Those people don't live there all the time, so they can just move. And we can put a parking lot there. I'm not saying it was paradise, but they're going to put a parking lot there. And then there's still the Thailand lease. Oh, Indian people, can we buy some more of your land? Are we going to pay them enough? But anyway, is that a question? Not for me. Not for me. I want low growth, because there are hardly any places like this in the whole country. We need to preserve this place. We really need to preserve it. I know most of the people in here, and I'm not saying I got along with everybody all the time, but I try to, because it helps me grow and be a better person. And when I have to go across on the ferry in the aid car, you know, here's my accommodation I make for ADA. I'll put a sheet over my head so maybe nobody's going to know who I am. But if they do know who I am, hopefully I'm on good terms with these people, because I know these people. And that is a very, that is a precious thing. Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but they do want to answer. They want to answer that question. Thank you.
Anyone roll and start comments, and where the money is.
It's my understanding that money did come out of the surplus out of the operations budget. Those that were involved in the beginning, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. That's where the money came from, the study. With regard to the character of the island and whether the island is going to grow or not, that's a zoning issue. And you're going to need to convince the county council to downzone all of Long Island. Now, when I stood in this very spot, over there actually, and a meeting in the Grange several years ago, I remember how long ago, when I got unceremoniously handed your sub-area plan, I said the same thing. And I'll say it again. I don't care. What do you care? If you want it downzoned, then convince the county council to downzone. But they didn't. And now we, as Public Works, need to respond to what's in front of us. So that's where we are, and I appreciate everything you had to say, honestly, but that is where we're going in the projections. We didn't even take the highest growth projections that other people had mentioned, which are significant potential growth out here. And you would have significant changes in the character. Absolutely correct.
So what I'll add to that is, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me tonight, but the ridership projections are really not based on considerable growth of new housing or people living on the island. This is really based, mostly it's people, this is not living here, this is how many people are gonna ride the ferry. And as you know, in the summertime, a lot more people ride the ferry who don't live here. And that's what this is about. What you're right about, you have a beautiful island. In fact, you made a mistake, you invited me up here, so I'm gonna come back. And I'm gonna be one of those people who add to that statistic of invading your island. So because of that, though, that's what we're talking about here. Again, this is very moderate growth. It's like 0.75% per year, projected out to 2040. And then we straight lined it on past that because, like I think I mentioned to you earlier, when you get in the far out years, there's so many things that could change in our world that, you know, who knows what's going to happen. So the best we have is what we're projecting out to 2060 for now, which was very slow, moderate growth. And it's really about people who want to come and appreciate your island too, spend some money here, add to your revenue on the ferry. If you don't want them, you know, that's something you guys figure out how to keep people off your island. If you want them to come, you know, some of them are relatives, some of them are not. but what I'm telling you is it really wasn't based, the numbers are very, very small on the population increase on that. So, here, just come on.
One question that I have how's that?
Good.
Okay. One question that occurs to me is that came out of issues with the last attempt to get a new ferry. And that had to do with the capacity of any of these vessels to go somewhere other than Gooseberry Point, because with sea level rise, there's a good chance we'll start getting cut off more from the mainland. I mean, there's data about that. And so there's a practical question, would any of these be even capable of going to like Bellingham or something if we had to go to some alternative location?
So what we haven't done yet, and we haven't talked about tonight, is really vessel design. The first thing we wanted to do was sort of get the level of service and get that established and really get a feel for what you want, whether it's the character of the island or how big you want the boat to be, the frequency, et cetera, to sort of set that up. After that, you go to vessel design. As we talked about earlier, like the little Hayu, it can go in great big slips. So there's ways to design the boat that it could go somewhere else. As far as regular service, and I think it's one of the reasons that the alternatives looked at quickly landed on staying at Gooseberry Point, is because the length of a trip anywhere else would make the frequency of service so far apart. Instead of every 10 or 15 minutes or even half hour that you have today, it might be every hour or more at best. And so not only does that lead you to a couple things, less frequent service, but also you're going to pulse more people at one time, so you really need a bigger boat to provide that less frequent service. So all of a sudden, instead of bringing 16 or 20 or 34 vehicles at one time, you might need a boat that brings something bigger than that, 50 or 60. And do you really want that many landing at one time, kind of pulsing off? So that's the kind of thing that we're thinking about. So is it capable in an emergency? Absolutely. You should always be able to design a vessel that could go somewhere else in an emergency. But I don't think you want to look at that as any kind of regular service. So.
again, thank you very much, everybody who has come out and great questions. I hope you will continue to be participatory. There is a handout at the back that tells all the different ways that you can participate and have your opinions heard and be part of the decision-making process. So keep in mind that we are shooting for going to council with a recommendation, hopefully in early June. So we need to stay on top of this. And now is the time. If you're going to participate, now is the time. If you haven't already. And with that, I'll just say thank you again, and we'll see you in May, if not sooner.